to go ahead and get introductions rolling. I think everybody knows me by now. I'm Christine Jones-Manacho. I'm the Professional Development Quality Coordinator with VPOST. Today we have with us some folks from Alexandria City Public Schools. We have Miss Faiza Jackson. She is the mental health specialist there, and we have Mr. Gregory Baldwin, who is the school climate and culture specialist. Mrs. Faiza Jackson is the mental health specialist for Alexandria City Public Schools. In this role, she advocates for mental and emotional wellness through trauma-informed practices, universal prevention strategies, and resources for best practices related to social and emotional learning. Mr. Gregory Baldwin is the School Climate and Culture Specialist for Alexandria City Public Schools. In this role, he serves as the district-wide coordinator for restorative practices and is responsible for aligning social and emotional and behavioral intervention systems to build and repair relationships to create positive learning environments. And they're going to be speaking to us today about social emotional learning through restorative practices, building socially responsible relationships in an out-of-school time setting. We were able to preview some of these presentations last week just to make sure that our technicals were in line. And I have to say, I think that this is going to be a really powerful presentation, and I'm so excited for everybody to get it today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. So to get us started, I just first want to thank you for that introduction. Greg and I are really happy to be here with the group today and to share with you a little bit about how we use social emotional learning through restorative practices at Alexandria City Public Schools. So the goal of our presentation is to develop and support resiliency skills by using restorative practices to teach and practice the 5 social emotional learning competencies in a safe physical and emotional environment. Restorative practices builds positive communities and promotes healthy relationships in order to teach social, emotional, and conflict resolution skills. The circle process is an essential part of restorative practices, and it's a big part of what we'll be focusing on today. And it increases the likelihood that students will use their social emotional skills because they have regular opportunities to talk about and practice them. So the process provides structures for respectfully listening, gaining insight into how others are feeling, sharing feelings and experiences, managing emotions, and much, much more. First, we're going to begin by giving an overview of restorative practices and understanding the connections between social emotional learning and restorative practices. And then we'll move into a participatory model where we will ask you as workshop attendees to actually experience the circle process with us, and then have a chance to debrief, reflect, and apply this information to how your work looks in the out-of-school time setting. Christine gave wonderful introductions of the work that we do, but I do just want to give Mr. Baldwin a chance to say hello and introduce himself.
Thank you so much, Faiza. And again, thank you, Christine, and all of you for being with us today. We are truly, truly appreciative to have this opportunity and chance to share. So again, thank you.
Before we get started and move into the objectives and the learning piece of our presentation, Mr. Baldwin and I both would like to just ask everybody here to take a moment of silence with us to honor George Floyd, in honor of Black lives that have been lost to violence. And so if you don't mind, please, we'd like to ask everybody right now to share with us in this moment of silence. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
It's part of being a community with each other we just felt it was important for us to recognize and respect what's happening around us currently. For today's presentation, we want to really focus on not only understanding what social emotional learning is, and having a working understanding of restorative practices and how to use some of them, but we really want to spend some time thinking about how restorative practices in social emotional learning are complementary and what a fully integrated implementation looks like in an out of school time setting. We also want to explore the benefits. So once you have this implementation model in place, what are the benefits for you, for your programming, and then for your students? So I'm going to start us off by thinking about what social emotional learning is. Often I think we hear a lot of these buzzwords that are pretty common right now, but we don't take the time to really think about the definition and engage with it. And so when we think about social emotional learning, and for the purposes of the presentation today, we want to think about it as a process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions and acquire positive relationship and decision-making skills. This is based on the definition from CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. If you take a look at the visual, I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking through it. CASEL defines social emotional learning by breaking it into 5 competencies that we teach students, which is self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. What I like about the wheel visual that CASEL has created is they also then look at what are the contexts within which children and students learn these different skills. So they talk about how it begins in the classroom with curriculum and instruction and intentional learning of these competencies, but it's reinforced through school-wide practices and policies and through family and community partnerships. And that's the part that I think is really important and why I feel so excited to be here with this audience today, because when we give students opportunities to continually practice these skills, that's when they begin to internalize them and it becomes a part of who they are and how they interact with others. So we're going to take a few minutes to watch, it's a 5-minute video that talks about what social emotional learning can look like in the out of school time setting. One thing that I really want to point out as we go through this video is that they talk about the 3 signature practices of social emotional learning, or the 3 signature practices that CASEL recommends. And as we look at it, after this, we're going to transition to our next part to talk about restorative practices. And these 3 signature practices of a welcome and inclusion activity, building engaging practices, and ending with an optimistic closure are really built into what restorative practices can be, especially in the community circle structure. So I'm going to go ahead and play the video. If anybody has any trouble with the sound, just raise your hand or let us know. And then we'll move into thinking and learning about restorative practices.
Out of school time, OST organizations change the lives of school-age program participants by developing the whole child. Social and emotional learning, SEL, is one of the key processes through which this occurs. SEL supports children in building the skills they need to engage in positive social interactions with others, achieve success in academic settings, and develop skills for work and life ahead. So how do we make social and emotional learning a consistent part of every young person's before and after school experience, even when our time with them is already so full? Here are 3 simple social and emotional learning practices that can help create safe and caring learning spaces for everyone every day. Greet youth with a welcoming inclusion activity. Then along the way, build engaging practices. And end with an optimistic closure. When thoughtfully chosen and well facilitated, the SEL 3 signature practices can help create a solid foundation for success for every young person before, during, and after school. They are aligned with many of the other practices you're already doing, so they may feel familiar. Consistently building the signature practices into your daily planning and program design and intentionally connecting them to your goals is what makes them powerful levers of change. Why do they work? The SEL3 signature practices are based on research that tells us that young people learn best when they are actively involved, have opportunities to collaborate, to problem solve, and to connect their learning to their own lives, interests, and goals. First, let's look at welcoming inclusion activities. Research underscores the importance of feeling seen and welcomed to truly feel part of a group. The predictability of a routine that opens our time together helps establish safety and inclusion, hearing each other's voices, making personal connections, and setting a positive tone promotes a sense of belonging. Welcoming activities also provide a bridge into the leader's goals for the day. Some examples of welcoming inclusion activities are warmly greeting everyone with a smile, using their preferred name with accurate pronunciation, and engaging in a whole group greeting activity or an interactive experience designed to build connections. Next, let's look at engaging practices that foster positive relationships, collaboration, active learning, and enjoyment during program time. These practices are designed to help youth stay focused and connected while engaging in creative and varied activities. Some examples of engaging practices include encouraging youth input with open-ended questions and explicitly teaching the skills for being a great partner or teammate like listening, problem solving, and empathy. The third SEL signature practice is the optimistic closure. Intentionally closing group activities and experiences helps strengthen relationships and leads to smoother transitions. And having a closure routine at the end of your time together helps children leave on an optimistic note, feeling calm and centered and ready for their next experience. Many examples of ways to close a group activity are found in the SEL 3 Signature Practices Playbook. And as each young person leaves, a personal optimistic closure that invites them to share an appreciation about an experience they had today, the way they worked or played together, to name what they're looking forward to tomorrow, or one thing they are wondering about, builds closure in an intentional way and supports a seamless transition to school or home. When chosen intentionally and facilitated skillfully, these 3 SEL signature practices are keys to creating a warm, safe, and inclusive before and after school environment for everyone to enjoy.
So as I turn it over to Mr. Baldwin to talk to us about restorative practices, I encourage everybody just to keep these 3 signature practices in mind and think about how it fits within the community circle experience that we're going to have together today.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jackson, for sharing with us the SEL3 signature practices. And I'm getting ready to share with you now a little bit about restorative practices and how you can actually implement these signature practices simply as you prepare to engage in having community circles with your scholars. So when we talk about restorative practices, restorative practice have been used for centuries in indigenous communities as a way to repair harm and resolve conflict. And I think especially at a time like this, we need something that can do that. I also would be remiss if I did not take the opportunity to just recognize the contributions of the indigenous people. So we honor them for their work and for their sacrifice. And so today, these practices, these restorative practices, restorative justice, are used throughout our various systems, most notably in education and criminal justice and in communities across the world. Restorative practices is really an approach. It's an approach that shifts the focus of discipline from punishment to learning, and from the individual to the community. And this evidence-based approach has dramatically decreased suspensions, expulsions, and disruptive behaviors in a growing number of districts. And so, again, when we talk about social emotional learning, social emotional learning and restorative practices, restorative justice really do go hand in hand. Talking through conflicts helps teach and strengthen skills such as communication and self-efficacy and problem solving. And by listening to others, students learn to be more respectful, consider different perspectives, practice impulse control, and reflect on how their actions affect the people around them. So in a nutshell, restorative practices really is about relationships. And in my nearly 30 years as an educator, I've discovered, and I believe this, and this is what helped me, I think, to be able to obtain some level of hopefully success in this work, is that students don't care what you know until they know how much you care. So I just want to thank you for afforded me an opportunity just to share that with you. So now we want to talk about virtual community circles, because that's the challenge. How do you facilitate a circle virtually when we're used to, just like this picture demonstrates, we're used to being with our students, and we're used to being with them physically and being in an actual physical circle. Well, because of the times that we're in currently, we can't do that. So what do we do? So I want to just share this first, that Marge Armstrong with Just Practices shares that the circle format is an ancient form of communication for spiritual, political, and communal life, and it's found throughout world traditions. I mean, it's been adapted for discussion, decision-making by teachers, social workers, judges, community members, police officers, and students. And the circle is used throughout the world when a group of people want to talk about an issue in a way that allows everyone to participate and contribute. It's a symbol of unity and cooperation. And we believe that circles really is a great way to teach social emotional learning. So we just want to thank you in advance for having patience with us and being willing to try this, because we're going to move now into forming a virtual circle, okay? All right, so with that, I want to share with you just a few things. So we're going to share circle guidelines with you. But right now, we're so fortunate we have almost 50 participants. So in order for us to be able to demonstrate how the virtual circle will work, if Christine or Blair could assist with this, we need 5 bold volunteers. We just need 5 volunteers, because the 5 volunteers are going to represent the wonderful participants that are with us today. So Christine and Blair, if you can help us obtain 5 volunteers, we appreciate it.
I'll just start by saying, if anybody wants to raise their hand using the raise hand function, or just type in the chat that they will volunteer before we start just randomly grabbing people, feel free to chime in. Okay, we got Sherry Telton. So what we're going to do is, when you volunteer, we're going to go ahead. You can either unmute yourself from video or audio, or we will find your little name on here and do that for you.
So we have Sherry so far. Okay, we need
got
4 more.
Elizabeth. but she's saying that she doesn't have audio or video. Will that work in this scenario?
Yeah, she could just use the chat feature.
Okay, great.
Great.
Do we have anybody else?
Can we get 3 more participants?
3 more.
Perfect. We got 1 more. Thank you, Shireen.
Shireen.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Shireen, if you haven't already, if you can just unmute your audio, and video is optional. I think I see that, Sherry, we don't have video of you, so I'm just gonna not undo that for you, I'm gonna assume.
Yeah. And we need 2 more, and I've already discussed it with your leadership. You will get Saturday
There we
and
go. Hey,
Sunday
Sherry.
off if you volunteer. You will get Saturday and Sunday off.
Okay.
Okay, so we
And
have
then
Jennifer.
Nelson.
Perfect.
So I have Sherry, Elizabeth, Sharon, Jennifer. Do we have 1 more?
And Francine Scott Thompson.
All right, Francine, thank you so much. So we have Sherry, Elizabeth, Sharon, Jennifer, and Francine. So that's going to be our circle order. And don't worry, I'll call your names again to remind you, but our virtual circle is going to consist of Sherry, Elizabeth, Shireen, Jennifer, and Francine. And if I mispronounce your name, please forgive me. Names are so important. So when you do share, please also share your name. Your name is so important to us. So with that being said, Ms. Jackson, I'm going to go ahead and share the circle guidelines, and we're going to get ready. So what I'm going to share with you right now, the circle guidelines for circles. I was trained by the International Institute for Restorative Practices, and also by Dr. Fania Davis. And these circle guidelines tend to be consistent with best practices. So this is what I want to share with all of the participants in our virtual circle, as well as the other participants who are supporting us today. So we're just going to take you through this as if we're having a circle. And so again, we want to thank you for participating in our circle. And I want to just share with you circle guidelines, and we hope that at the end we can get a consensus that everyone will agree. Okay, is that okay? Yep. All right. So the first guideline is this: we want you to speak from the heart. This is a safe space, it's a safe place. And so we want you to speak from the heart. We want you to share your truth. The second guideline is that we want you to listen from the heart as others are sharing. So as others are speaking from the heart and sharing their truth, those of us who are part of community, who are part of this sacred and special space, we ask that you listen from your heart. Let go of stories that may make it hard to listen to someone else's truth. And the other guideline is this: trust you will know what to say. Don't worry about messing up. Don't worry about not sounding eloquent. Just know and just understand that you're in a safe place, and just trust you'll know what to say. And then the other thing is, as we're in community, as we're in circle, that we're going to share the space and share the air. So we want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to share. One of the things I love about restorative practices is that it is an equitable practice. So we just, again, want to thank you for doing that. And we also have something that we share that's called protecting the circle. And we share this with our students and others we work with. As long as what is being shared does not involve harming yourself, harming others, or you being harmed, then everything stays in the circle. So what is shared in the circle stays in the circle. And so Sherry, Elizabeth, Shireen, Jennifer, Francine, if you could agree to that, if you could give us a thumbs up, we'd appreciate it. Thumbs up if you're good. Wonderful, wonderful. Now, the other thing I want to say is this, and this is important when you talk about a virtual circle, because this question comes up. So how do you actually make a virtual circle? So there are several ways to do it, and I've shared you could use the chat feature. So if you use the chat feature, you could actually just list the order of the individuals as they would speak. So if I were to enter the names in the chats feature, I would say circle order, and I would list Sherry, Elizabeth, Sharon, Jennifer, and Francine, and that would be my order. But we also have some who are more tech savvy, and they use actually graphic programs where they actually create the circles. And so you would just create a circle and you have little circles in it, and you would just place the names of each and every participant in the circle. And that's another way that you could make your virtual circle experience even more engaging. And then last but not least, again, we want to make sure that we have an opportunity that everyone can give voice. With that being said, sometimes there are just some of our scholars who may not be comfortable sharing openly. Maybe that question maybe have even triggered something. A Trump. So we also offer the chat feature. So we want to also, and I'm glad that Elizabeth is with us, and she's going to use the chat feature because this is another way for everyone to give voice. So we also want to share that as well. Okay. All right. So with that being said, and we've taken time to discuss the circle guidelines, we're going to turn it back over to Ms. Jackson.
So for this morning, we talked about the relationship between social emotional learning and restorative practices. And what we really want to be able to demonstrate is what that looks like together, the integration of both. And so for the circle topic this morning, we're going to focus on one of the CASEL competencies, which is self-awareness. And self-awareness is really the ability to accurately recognize one's own emotions, thoughts, and values, and how they influence behavior. So we're really looking at building the ability within our students to identify their emotions, to accurately understand what they're feeling, recognize their strengths, and then we want to build self-confidence and self-efficacy. And so we're going to look at how we can use the community circle structure to help start to intentionally build these skills in our students. One thing I just kind of want to point out is sometimes with social emotional learning, we make the mistake, I think all of us do this, of assuming that students may already know, or the youth that we're working with may already intuitively know how to do some of these things or have these skills. And actually, social emotional learning is always learned. It's learned from the adults around us. It's learned from the models that we see, from the communities that we are a part of. And that's why we think it's so important to bring these structures in and make it known to students that we are practicing these skills. So as we think about starting our circle, this is something where, of course, our wonderful 5 volunteers, we're asking you to participate, but we invite everybody to join us in our welcoming and inclusion activity. We always begin our community circles with a mindfulness exercise. We call it the contemplation. We have 5 C's in our circle. And what that really does, and especially for an out of school time program, I think it gives students a chance to disconnect from what may have been happening throughout their day and to come together and really be present in the space that you're in together. And so we'd really like to invite you all to take part with us in this grounding activity. So the first thing, I'll guide you through it. You can see the prompts on the screen, but I'm also going to talk us through it. And the first thing that I ask all of us to do is just to take 3 slow and deep belly breaths. I'll start there. Now we're going to engage in an exercise to bring us fully present into our environment. You can write down each of these things. You can just think through them and identify them. But the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to look around in the space that you're in and list 5 things that you can see around you. Now I'm going to ask you to be aware of your body and the space that you're taking. And what are 4 things that you can feel around you? Now we're going to take a minute to really tune in. And what can we hear? What are 3 things that you can identify that you can hear in your current environment? Moving on to our next sense, I'm going to ask you to think of 2 things that you can smell currently. What is in the air? 2 things you can smell. And we're going to end our grounding activity by thinking about 1 thing you can taste, either currently or 1 thing you like to taste. And when you have that completed, I invite you to close out our grounding activity today with another 3 slow, deep belly breaths. Thank you, everybody, for engaging in that exercise to bring us together today in our circle.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. So now we're going to do a check-in. As Ms. Jackson shared, we have what we call the 5 C's, the first being contemplation, which is a mindfulness activity. But this is something that sometimes we forget to do, is just simply check in. Every circle you facilitate should have a check-in. It's a way of gauging the group, see how they're feeling, what emotions are being brought in. It's almost like an emotional temperature check. So we're going to now do this check-in activity, and we're going to ask you how you feel, and we're going to start with Sherry, and after Sherry, we're going to hear from Elizabeth. After Elizabeth, we're going to hear from Shireen. After Shireen, we're going to hear from Jennifer. And after Jennifer, we're going to hear from Francine. And again, you can share with us, or you can share with us via the chat. So I want to give you just about 30 seconds to give that some thought. You see that we have some emojis listed here. Everything from angry to scared to sad to happy to frustrated, anxious, disappointed, calm. And if there's one that we don't have listed, feel free to share. We just want to know how you're feeling, okay? So we're going to give you about 10 more seconds. 5 more seconds. All right, with that being said, we want to start with Sherry. So, Sherry, how are you feeling today?
Today, I am distracted, I am frustrated and calm all at the same time.
Thank you for sharing your truth, Sherry. Elizabeth, how are you feeling? And I know earlier you said that you would be using the chat feature, and that is more than fine. Thank you. Happy and energized. Thank you for sharing your truth, Elizabeth. Shireen, how are you feeling?
I am feeling happy. I'm appreciative that I get to be part of this. And that's my bird in the background. So he's happy too.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your truth and for your bird also sharing their truth. So we're so glad that you're happy. Jennifer, how are you today? Checking on you, checking in. How are you feeling, Jennifer?
Okay, I guess I'm a little anxious. The tech part of this is my big challenge.
Okay.
I'm excited to be able to access this kind of information. I think it's going to make me a better um, participant on the teacher level when we do get back with our kids, whether it's in person or online. And I'm just happy to be here.
Thank you, Jennifer. We're so glad that you're with us, and we're glad that you're happy. I understand tech issues. I'm still having them myself. So again, thank you for sharing your truth. Francine, how are you today? How are you feeling? How do you feel?
I'm between happy and anxious.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Francine, for sharing your truth between happy and anxious. And again, we just thank all of you all for just sharing how you feel, because how you feel is so important. And the other thing I want to share is that it helps us really get a good understanding of those students who may need additional support. Because if we have a student that says, you know, I'm just scared, or I'm afraid, that'll give us an opportunity, or I'm angry, to make sure we give that student some additional support. So perhaps, you know, right before the circle, right before we dismiss class, follow up that student, make sure everything's okay. If that student needs additional support, whether it's through their counselor or their social worker, this is a great way to assess that. Okay. So at this time, Ms. Jackson.
I'm going to move us to what we call the connection part of our circle. And I want to link this back to what we talked about with the 3 signature practices. You'll notice that we spend a lot of time in our community circle on the welcoming and inclusion activities. And the reason for that is because Mr. Baldwin always says this, and I truly believe it, that you have to have connection before content. And if students feel connected and feel that they're in relationship with you and with each other, when you get to that content, you're going to get more honest feedback and you're going to get a higher level of participation. So we spend a lot of time at the beginning of our circles laying that foundation in order to build safety as we get to the content piece. So for our connection question today, we're going to ask our volunteers again, and I'll remind you of the order. But we want to think about this kind of unique circumstance that we're in under isolation or home quarantine, and think if you had what we call a super quarantine skill, that all of a sudden now, as you've been home these days, you're like, man, I really wish I could, or this would help me right now. What would that skill be? And kind of what motivates you or what got you there? So the example I'll share is that my mother is a gardener. She has a green thumb. She can grow anything. And I always kind of took it for granted because I knew she could do it. But, you know, we're in a situation now where unfortunately she can't come over to the house and help me out. And I really wish that I had her green thumb, and I'm trying to figure out how to grow my own vegetable garden, especially because I think it's something that my son would really enjoy. So if I had it, my super quarantine skill would be my mother's green thumb. And so I'm going to invite our volunteers. I'll give you about 30 seconds just to kind of think this over. What kind of skill would you want during this time? And then we'll start again with Sherry. Then we'll move to Elizabeth, Shireen, Jennifer, and Francine. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. About 10 more seconds. All right, Sherry, if you are ready, what would your super quarantine skill be?
My super quarantine skill would technically be something I already know how to do, but even better, computers make me nervous. And everything that I can do at work is one way. And now I'm working on a Chromebook, and I just believe that this is the worst thing ever to operate on is a Chromebook. So I wish I could just like have this multi-functioning tech brain that I could do anything on any computer without getting frustrated.
I love it. Thank you, Sherry. I think a lot of us feel you in that statement right now. Thank you. I'm going to move to Elizabeth. I know you'll be in our chat box, Elizabeth.
And we're just going to give Elizabeth time to type in her response.
I know it can take a minute.
I see it. Okay. So Elizabeth said to be able to reach all our students with the yoga practices I teach to them and let them know that we can have calm and peace and clarity during this time and to help them through being homeschoolers. Wow.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm probably not alone in saying that I would love to learn some of your yoga practices as well. Let's move to Shireen. What would your super quarantine skill be?
Well, I would get rid of this virus so that we could go back to being in connection and being in person. So I guess I would come up with the cure.
I love it. Thank you. And we're moving to Jennifer.
I wish I could, if I had a super skill, I wish I could give, I have a little bit of area where I'm at. I'm not in a close neighborhood or suburb. I wish I could give each of my students that are in very confined type situations, I wish I could give them the breathing room to get some healing, to get further on with their education, and basically just to reach out to kids with that kind of spirit.
Thank you, Jennifer. I really appreciate that outdoor space and room, and it's important for all of us right now. And Francine.
I love what she just said, and I would like to be able to have the see ahead power of a student's need and to be able to supply it to just to give them the comfort of knowing that, okay, you're having an issue right now, but you know, we can figure it out. And I think that form of concrete help could help, you know, calm a lot of unknowns. So I would like to have the superpower to see ahead and to supply the students with something that could help them.
Thank you so much. I have to tell you guys that Mr. Baldwin and I have asked this question a couple of times in some virtual community circles. And I think today we heard probably, I think 5 responses we have not yet heard.
I agree.
So
yeah.
You guys are really like thinking and putting effort and creativity into this, and I really appreciate it. We're going to move into the content piece of the circle, which is where we're practicing that social emotional skill of self-awareness. And I want to also invite everybody that's participating in our circle, you know, even if you're not sharing aloud with the group, just to engage with us and to think about your own answers to each of these questions. And we are going to have a little bit of time to debrief once we move through the circle, and would invite people just to share some of their reflections with us. And so in this content piece, we're thinking about self-awareness and accurate perception. And so the question that we're going to ask to build that skill is, think of a time recently when you made a mistake. How did that feel? And what did you do? So a mistake you made and how it made you feel in that moment. And if you could go back, would you do something differently? And so this requires some vulnerability, but also gives a little bit of room that you can share what content you feel comfortable with, what kind of mistake you feel comfortable sharing with the group. And I'm going to give our volunteers a little bit of think time, and then we'll move through. And I'm going to give a special shout out to Sherry for being our first volunteer, because I don't think she knew she was going to have to go first every time.
I love it. I love it. And we have about 12 minutes left, so
Yes.
we're doing well. We want to hear, so yes.
So Sherry, how about when you are ready, go ahead and get us started.
So I'm very clumsy. I make a lot of mistakes. Well, I guess we could say I maybe recently, maybe not just me, but everybody has probably just been like this teeny tiny little like short fuse of a person. And one of my kids had done something. I don't know what they did. And I just started screaming and yelling. And I said, I'm tired and I'm frustrated. You know, like I really just like let the bomb go. I felt bad. Like I did feel bad. But then again, I was like, you shouldn't feel bad for expressing your feelings. You know, you're allowed to do that. But I kind of went back like later on. I was like, you know, look, guys, I'm sorry. I should not have acted like that. But guess what? These are my feelings. This is how I feel. I acted out of my emotions. I acted out and I got it out. I said, but it wasn't okay for me to take out my frustration with what you're doing on you. But I just had to let them know, hey, if you're feeling angry or, you know, you're feeling mad or whatever that feeling it is, don't hold it in. Just go ahead and just let out the cry or the yell or the scream. I'm done. Great job, buddy. Let out the, okay, thanks. So just let out, that's my distraction. That's my feeling from distraction there. But just let that feeling out. Like, don't let it out on somebody else. But I told you guys how I felt. I'm sorry for yelling and sounding like a crazy person, but those were my feelings, and your feelings are better processed out and like instead of holding them in. So I may not have went back. I might not have yelled as much, but that ended up being a learning experience from everybody in the house, from the 4-year-old all the way up to the 14-year-old, to just go ahead and feel whatever that feeling is and get it out, but just try not to hurt anybody else or break things or whatever in the process.
Thank you, Sherry. And I think what you said is really validating around, we all have these feelings and feelings are okay, but we have to think about how we express them in a way that doesn't hurt others. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to invite Elizabeth to share with us. And as we wait, I know Elizabeth's typing her answer in. Blair, thank you for your comment. She said, I think every mother has experienced this.
And we're going to do our very best to try to hear from everyone, but I do know that we're almost at that point where we'll be out of time. Oh, so glad to hear from Elizabeth. She says, I took the advice of a former colleague and sort of bypassed another coworker for something they should have had the opportunity to do. I let my coworker have space, then went to her privately to apologize and talk things out. We both had a learning moment and later realized that she wouldn't have been able to do this task. Yes, I would have done it differently and would have gone with my gut to offer this opportunity to all and then let them decide. Wow, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sharing with us.
Shireen, we invite you to share.
Okay. I don't like to make mistakes, but I make them often, like all of us, we're humans. So mine was, I think some people on the call might relate to this. I messed up on something in the Canaan new data system that we're doing. And so I was angry and frustrated and upset. And then I just reached out to someone who could help. And then I learned from it. And I think with mistakes, you just learn. Because I'm going to probably make another mistake in the system, and then I'm going to just learn from it. So it's always good, but it is frustrating.
Thank you, Shireen. Thank you for sharing. I'm keeping an eye on time. So here's what I would like to have us do. We do want to move through the circle process, but we had our wonderful volunteers, Jennifer and Francine. So I'm going to ask Mr. Baldwin to keep us moving through to make sure that we end on time. But Jennifer and Francine, if you had your item to share prepared, I invite you to share it with us in the chat box so we can still learn from your experience.
Thank you so much, Faiza, and thank you again. So when we talk about how to conclude the circle, you always want to make sure that you have a closing activity, and this is going to be real easy. It's going to be harmless, and we sure want to make sure that we hear from Jennifer and Francine. So we're going to start with the circle order backwards. So we want you just to share with us just one word to describe your experience today with this virtual circle. We're going to give you about 10 seconds, one word to describe your experience with this virtual circle today. So we're going to start with Francine, just one word to share how you feel about this virtual circle experience today.
Enlightening.
Wonderful. Thank you, Francine. Enlightening. Jennifer, one word to describe how you feel.
Motivated to use better practices.
Wow.
Motivated. There you go.
Wow, great. Motivated. Shireen, how do you feel?
Grateful.
Wonderful, wonderful. Elizabeth, and we're going to give you time to share with us via chat. Just one word to describe how you feel. Wow, wonderful, appreciative. And Sherry, one word, how did you feel?
Comforted.
Wonderful. All right. So thank all of you all so much for participating. And now we're going to move to questions, and Ms. Jackson's going to lead us through that.
I want to make sure we have time for questions. And so Christine, I'll ask you if there's a way to share this later. This is available through the CASEL website. But the 5 competencies, they break down the skills. And so what I encourage you to do as you think about using this structure in your community setting is to take a look at this, and that's how you come up with your circle questions, your content questions. Also, all of you did such a wonderful job in modeling vulnerability. And when you do that and you're able to say, hey, I make mistakes too, your students feel safe doing that. And so that's perfect. Christine's going to follow up with the recording so everybody will have access to this. And I'm going to move us in and invite people to ask questions. We can take questions through the chat box, or if you would like to raise your hand.
Any questions?
I just wanted to ask about incorporating this into a class that you may not have. I am a resource teacher, So I only see these students for 45 minutes, once a week. And I can incorporate these in my lesson plan or try, but I'm really not going to have that much time when you try to push more towards, the lesson that you have, and really finding out the feedback. And not even knowing the future of, learning. So this may be something that will have a longer platform or more time to put in. So on a small scale, how can I, include this in my work?
Thank you for that question. I have a couple of suggestions, and then Mr. Baldwin, if you want to add also.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I see Mr. Baldwin do artfully is you can structure the circle to take as long or as little time as you need it to. Mm-hmm. So it is possible perhaps to do a 10-minute circle where the mindfulness could be 2 deep breaths that we take together. The check-in is a 1-word answer. So you kind of move through that process more quickly while still hitting the elements of it. The other thought that I had is designating maybe 1 time a month, since you only see the students once a week, that is for connection. And you say, today in our resource lesson, we're focusing on building this skill together. And that time is dedicated to this type of work. Mr. Baldwin, would you add anything to that?
No, you described it perfectly, Faiza. You did.
Awesome. Thank you.
I see another question here that we have from Susan.
Okay.
She says, we are structured in 3 groups, homework, tutoring, and enrichment. Would you suggest this for each group or just in your first group? Just in first group?
I would suggest it for each group. The idea is that you want to build relationships and foster community. And each of those groups, the homework group, tutoring, and enrichment would benefit greatly from learning these social, emotional learning skills. And it's like anything, we want to expose them to these practices as much as possible so they'll be able to use it not just in the schoolhouse, but at home and in the community. What are your thoughts, Ms. Jackson?
I would agree. And I would say I know that time is always kind of the logistical factor to take into consideration. So if it is possible to do it across the 3 groups, I think that's really valuable. If not, given your time constraints, I say at least getting students to do it once during that session with you is better than not doing it at all. Mm-hmm.
And I think Sherry has her hand raised.
Just a question. Do you guys have a list of maybe topic questions and or the contemplation and check-in part? Do you guys have like a list of those things that you could send like to our emails after this, or just maybe some websites that we can go get the information from?
We can certainly share resources. I'll be honest and tell you, I have a lot of mindfulness because that's part of what I do in my role as mental health specialist. I don't have everything compiled into one place, but I would be happy to, and Christine, I can talk to you about how best to do this. Maybe Mr. Baldwin and I can put together like a 1-page resource list of different places that you can look for this information.
Be glad to, because yes, we have an abundance of resources. I'd be glad to share them with you, Sherry.